Okay, so let's start out with just a few questions for the audience. So show of hands, who is an Identity Now customer? Okay, that shouldn't be surprising given the session. Okay, who is a user of SaaS Workflows right now? Okay, who's heard of SaaS Workflows? Okay, okay. Who's excited to be in Austin at Navigate? Woo! All right. All right, very good. So I'm glad that that one didn't slip by you guys. You were still awake. So by way of introduction, my name is Michael Cott. I am a director with PwC's cybersecurity practice. Along with Brent, I'll be taking you through SaaS Workflows. So Brent, if you want to just...
Hi, I'm Brent McCormick. I'm a SE with SailPoint.
So I think the first thing we'll do is just go through the agenda. So solving complex use cases with SaaS Workflows. I think just based on what I saw from the audience here, there's some level of familiarity, maybe not a ton. So we'll start off with an overview that Brent will take you through, and that'll hopefully get everyone up to the same level of comfort. From there, I'll take us through what does this mean for our clients? What does this mean, for the folks in the room? How does this change the landscape for Identity Now and what you can do, that type of thing? Then after that, I'll take you through a real-world demo, so a use case that we used Workflows to solve at one of our clients, and you can see what it actually looks like in Identity Now and how the pieces fit together. And then at the end, we'll leave some time for questions. So with that, before we get started, I just want to set the stage a little bit here. We've been doing this for a long time. We've been implementing SailPoint for, I think, just about as long as SailPoint has been a company, close to it. We jumped into Identity Now in a big way 5 or 6 years ago, and I think it's been very interesting to watch that journey, right? Early on, I think there were features missing that could be frustrating, and it's really evolved and come a long way. But what we've seen is that customers are still kind of adjusting at times from the infinite flexibility that they might have had with their on-premise system or their legacy system to Identity Now. And the question of how do I actually tackle those workflows, right? It's always been maybe a complex one, right? It's something where you're breaking into event triggers, right? We've worked with clients to do Identity Now extensions, to do some of these really complex use cases. And what SaaS Workflows brings is a much simpler, cleanable, more supportable way to do this. And I'm really excited to take you guys through it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brent to take you through an overview.
Thank you. All right, so the first question we get quite often is, I have Identity Now. How come I don't see any workflow in Identity Now? So let's talk a little bit about how you get it. So it comes in 2 ways, and this is a packaging thing, right? Identity Security Cloud is our bundling of our offering for our SaaS software, SaaS options here. So you can see we have Identity Security Cloud Business and Business Plus. We have what are called standard capabilities, pretty much the basics, blocking and tackling of identity security, identity governance capabilities. And then below are the advanced capabilities. Either one of these 2 packages is how you qualify, how you will have workflow enabled in your Identity Now environment. So important that you understand that. Okay. The next topic to talk about is, what really is SaaS Workflows? SaaS Workflows is an orchestrated process. It's a way for us to initiate an automated process and being able to have a consistent way to respond. So we talk more and more about so much is going on, we're managing so much, it's beyond human capacity. Well, workflows can be that automated process for you, and you can decide exactly what that's going to look like for you. So what are the steps that you need it to do on your behalf to process and to fulfill business requirements that you have for a specific use case, as an example? So when we think about workflows, why workflows? And there's 4 specific areas that I'm going to cover. So Michael mentioned a little bit about coming from the on-premise to SaaS And enterprise are requiring this. It's an absolute enterprise requirement for automated processes to be able to manage in your environments there. The second one is it has to be simple, configurable, and one of the ways that we try to make this as convenient as possible is right out of the box we're including a library of content, including templates. And so before Navigate, there were 5 out-of-the-box templates. Now with the outlier workflow integrations, there's 3 more, so we have 8 templates that you have a starting point that you can decide, yep, this is exactly what I need, or no, I need to make changes here and here. So simple configuration is our goal. Sometimes you'll hear us say low code or no code. That's certainly the goal. But having some familiarity with coding and specifically JSON path, which you're going to see as we get into it in a little bit more detail, that's going to help tremendously. Third area is, it's a much bigger world out there than just what SailPoint is providing here. So we need to make sure that we're doing the integration with third-party systems here. So of course we need to integrate with all of our own products, exactly like Outliers, for example, but other modules from us and also from third parties. So whether you need to integrate with Microsoft Teams or with Slack to send out notifications, we can do that. If you need to be able to integrate with ServiceNow, we need to be able to do that as well. So that third-party integration, big theme for us to work here. And then lastly, focus on providing the identity security throughout the business. And what this means is there are a lot of tools that organizations use out there, tools like Splunk and others, that we need to make sure that we're interoperating and working with those as well to give you that full identity security picture there as well. So we have quite a mix here in terms of folks' knowledge around workflows. And so we hope to do some kind of a balance with jumping into a use case, but deciding, now how much of a primer do we give you is kind of the balancing act. And so I want to talk a little bit about it. So the view you see on the left is the actual builder itself. It's a drag and drop style of interface. On the leftmost side of that graphic, you see where library content resides. And there's 3 main object types that you'll see there. There are triggers, there are actions, and there are conditions or operators. And so this library is meant for you to be able to choose something. So it starts off with a trigger, and a trigger is going to have a certain set of data that comes with it. Right now, last time I looked in the product, there are 17 triggers that are published. There are about 25 actions that are published and about a half dozen operators that are in the product today. Now, and then I already mentioned templates. So this is kind of the starting point and all of the building blocks. Literally, you start with a trigger, you drag it and drop it to the canvas. Then you're going to decide what you're going to do with it. And that's the great thing about, we'll take you through a use case and an example. Now, if you're the type of person that hasn't had hands-on and you want to get hands-on, there is a wonderful tutorial on Identity University. We'll take you step by step and help you create your very first workflow. It introduces you to the JSON path and the code that is generated for you and kind of points that out. But I've spent time doing that, and it was less than a half an hour to go through and set that up. So once you have workflow enabled on your tenant, you could step through that. Or if you don't want to do the hands-on and mirror it, you can just watch it, and it will help you understand what the process is like. So you're dragging and dropping objects. You're then connecting those objects together. And then as you highlight the different steps, you're going to get a configuration panel on the right-hand side that allows you to have entry of fields, to do object selectors, and that's the basics on how you're going to interoperate and work with the system itself. So our hope here is with the templates. When you very first go in, the step before this, you choose what you're going to actually be doing in your workflow process itself. So choosing to start from a template or choosing to start at this point where you're going to be doing a fresh project, or you're going to be importing a JSON project, and that might be because you're moving from one tenant to another, and it helps the code itself be portable so you can move it around, right? So that's it. It's that simple. There's that much to it in terms of what you can expect and what you'll be working with there. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Michael.
Yeah. All right. So I think the next question that you may be wondering is, what does this mean for me, right? What does this mean for our clients? And so I touched on a little bit in the beginning, early on, before workflows, you kind of had two options if you wanted to tackle something a little bit more complex. Option one was to not do the use case, right? Just figure out a manual way, do something else, find another solution. Option two was to use event triggers, right? And so it looks something like this, right? It quickly gets very complicated. First thing you're having to do is figure out, okay, I need some type of link up between, or somewhere to run my workflows, right? It might be AWS, it might be Lambda, and so now you need to link those things up. You've got to get any firewall rules open that you need to get open. You've got to deal with, now somebody needs to know Lambda, they need to know AWS. I need a developer who can support that. I need an operations team who over time will have to deal with change management for that stuff, right? And I've added multiple points of failure to my instance here, which again, certain cases, this is great and it is necessary and it's very powerful. But what Workflows does is takes this and shrinks it way down, right? You get rid of all those dependencies. You don't have to worry about having someone who knows Lambda. You don't have to worry about how are we going to manage the code there, right? So it gets a whole lot simpler. And I think what changes the landscape here is moving from I need to either not be able to do this use case or I need all this additional component support to boom, identity now. So the next question you might be asking yourself is, what are some things I can actually do with this, right? We've talked a lot about what Workflows is and how it's different from event triggers. But what are things that you can actually do that maybe historically have been a struggle to implement? So the first one, and this is actually something we're going to go over in the demo coming up, is launching a mover certification, right? So very common use case where somebody is changing managers, changing jobs, want to make sure least privilege is enforced. So when you detect that mover, launch a certification campaign targeted at that one individual, right? Workflows solves for that. Next thing you might want to do is create a ticket somewhere, right? Create a ticket for hardware provisioning. Very common use case that I see all the time is joiners. We want to be able to create a ticket in ServiceNow for a laptop, right? And maybe that's part of a more complex flow. Workflows is a great way to do that. Another thing I've heard come up many times is, I need to send more types of emails. I need to send custom emails in different situations, right? So before Workflows, obviously you have the email templates that you can edit, right? But they're global email templates, and there's a lot less flexibility with how much you can send. I need specific instructions, and so we'll touch on this a bit in the demo as well. But for example, say you have the global certification email, right? And you want to have a different email that notifies people about this mover certification, right? Workflows gives you that power. Or you could just have a workflow that detects when a certification is complete and sends out a thank you. Maybe people need a little bit of encouragement to do their certifications. But that's another thing that you could do with Workflows, again, with a custom template. As we keep going, Workflows gives you building blocks, and what you can do is in part how creative you can be. There's some things that still happy to have a conversation about how to extend identity now using event triggers. But another thing that you might do is automatically raise an access request. And a use case that I've heard multiple times as well is, maybe you have a certain type of user, like a contractor, and in a lot of cases, they should be getting a VDI and a token, right? but that costs money. There's licenses associated with that. So you don't want to just assign it to everyone. You don't want to put it in the role. On the flip side, if you just wait for the manager to remember to request it, those users might go without that access for a lot longer. The manager remembers, right, productivity was lost. So it's an opportunity here where you can automatically raise that access request and then have the manager either say, yes, this person needs it, gets provisioned nice and easy, or no, this person doesn't need it, and we don't waste that license. And then the last one, again, there's many opportunities here, but one that I thought of right away is you can use an API call to launch a workflow. So one opportunity that I've seen at clients is, the whole involuntary termination process. So HR, if they want a way to trigger a leaver, right? You can use this. They call out from their system to Identity Now. It can run through the workflow, do the things that you would expect to do, maybe cleaning up and disabling access, sending an email, that type of thing. And that way you don't have to wait for the aggregation to run, right? And that periodic job. So there's lots of possibilities. There's many more. I think in some ways, it's how creative you can get with the building blocks that you see. But that brings us to the next part, which is, again, let's make this one step more tangible and make this a little bit more real. So real world use case here, we were lucky enough to be working with a client earlier this year in SailPoint, back when Workflows was in beta, to put together a workflow to solve a pretty pressing issue for them. I think it's going to be a familiar issue that many of you have probably encountered and had to deal with in different ways. So essentially, this comes down to getting in trouble with the compliance team, right? Compliance, audit, regulators, people, you get very strong expectations that something's going to get done quickly. And the position this client was in, big company, they have thousands of transfers per year. And what the compliance team found is that nobody was removing that access, right? It was persisting basically at best until the annual certification, and then it would get cleaned up. And so there were some specific cases that came up. Like there was someone who maintained administrative access long after they left the job. Compliance specifically pointed to this and said, this person has had this access for 6 months and they haven't needed it. This is a security risk, right? So at that point, the client said, well, we do annual certifications. Is that good enough? Can we stick with that? The compliance team said, no, on average, it's going to be 6 months, right, that access persists, sometimes up to an entire year. We need to do something to deal with this better. And so the goal was, let's just automatically send a certification when a transfer happens, right? So I guess maybe just take a quick pause here. How many people feel like they've got a good process in place for movers, right, for transfer certifications? Okay, a couple hands, good. How many people think they want to add something for mover certifications? Okay, good. We're going to go through that. So you're in the right place. So some of the complexities we'll talk through just to set the stage, because sometimes when you go through these demos, it's, in the perfect world, it would be this simple. It's never quite that simple. There's always something that makes it more complex than you want it to be. So in this case, first thing is just how do you detect a transfer, right? And there's never just a transfer flag. It's never that easy, right? So that's the first problem. But then you start looking at what are indicators of a transfer. And what we found, our team worked with the client team and the HR team, and we found that there isn't any one attribute you can look at. There's not even any two specific attributes you can look at. Really, the way that you determine a transfer occurred with 95% confidence is if any two out of these three attributes change. So the manager, the department, and the title, right? So if only one of them changed, you would be triggering a bunch of false positives certifications. You'd be wasting people's time, all that. If you waited for all three to change, you wouldn't actually get all the transfers that happened. You'd be missing a bunch. And so any two of those threes have to trigger, makes it that much more complicated. Workflows can solve for that. The next piece that we found is the HR feed, right? People make changes throughout the day. Sometimes there's human error. And so we don't want to falsely trigger a certification that shouldn't be happening. And so the best way to do that was to wait a day before processing this workflow, right? And that way, you know the change is for real, and you don't have to worry about sending an email and a certification to a manager who actually that was just, a little bit of a blip in the HR feed. And then the last piece here is sending an additional email. So I touched on this a bit earlier, but you've got just a single email template for certifications. You don't want to change that and just start making it longer and longer with, also you need to worry about transfer certifications and here's the expectations there, right? Or this might be a transfer. So the other opportunity that Workflows gave us is to send an additional email that gives those instructions, sets the expectations, right? Solves for all that. So with that, let's get into the demo. Okay. So I'm not crazy enough to do a live demo. Especially with the internet here. I don't know if you guys have been having the same issues I have. So I'll start running us through. Hopefully, looks very familiar so far. Getting logged into our lab tenant of Identity Now. So what we did is set this up to simulate, how we implemented this at the client. So get logged in to Identity Now, and now you can see, main homepage. We'll go to the admin section because that's where you're going to find workflows. I would highly recommend that all of you use multi-factor authentication, but since this is a lab environment, don't hold it against me. So now we're in, and you can see up top the workflows link. So this is where the magic happens. Jump into the workflows section, and you'll see we have I have 3 workflows configured here for purposes of going through this demo today. So the first one is the basic workflow. We'll talk a little bit about what just one of the template out of the box workflows looks like with that. The second one is the mover certification that we're actually going to run and see it happen. And then the third one is the mover certification with that wait step that we talked about to wait a day, but didn't want to have that day wait in the middle of our demo because I didn't think you guys had that kind of time. So the other thing, you can see on the right, 2 out of the 3 are disabled. This one is enabled. So you can't change them when they're enabled, which is a good thing. Don't want to change code that's live. So we'll disable it so that we can pop them open and look at them in the workflow builder. But we'll start with the basic workflow. So this will look familiar to anyone that's kind of popped into the templates, relatively simple. And this is solving for that use case we talked about, a manager certification when a transfer occurs. So it starts off with an attribute change trigger, and then it'll go through, do a null check on the attribute, then do a comparison. So essentially this comparison is just looking at, does the old value and a new value of manager equal each other? If so, then there's nothing to be done. Then we go to the end step and stop. If it does not equal, you've had a manager change, so then it starts running through these steps, right? This is the simple case of just anytime there's a manager change, we're going to create a certification campaign. And doing that is as simple as, these create and activate steps, followed by a send email step, and you're done. So very clean, simple interface. You can drag and drop these, piece them together. But this is what a basic workflow looks like. Obviously, in the real-world example that we just talked about, this wouldn't meet the need, right? We would get a lot of false positive certifications. So if we pop open what the actual workflow looked like, that's this second one here, the mover with the wait. Just take a look at it in the builder. And you can see things get a whole lot bigger. So it still starts with the trigger, but then we have the wait step. And Workflows makes it super easy, right? Wait for a day. That's actually all we needed to do to solve for that issue, which was awesome that it's that easy. But then as you zoom out, you can see branching for any 2 out of these 3 attributes quickly gets a little bit more complicated than the simple case, right? So it's the same basic building blocks, it's the same idea. And what you can see as I highlight these is looking at the attributes, right? Looking at title, seeing if that's changed. Over here we're looking at department to see if that's changed. And then in the middle, we're looking at manager. So all these add up to get you that 2 out of 3 logic. And once you've passed that point, then we have the actual steps to create the certification. So now we've detected 2 out of 3 have changed. We need to create a certification. You can see here, the create step is a pretty handy place where you can put additional details. So in the workflow, we added in some details about why. So in this case, this certification is being launched due to a manager and title change. Makes it a great way to keep track of where in the flow or which flow triggered this certification to happen. Could have also happened for manager and department if we were on this one, or for title and department if we were on the third column here, right? So all that will then show up in your certification description, and you can look at it later, kind of keep track of what's triggering. The other piece that we talked about is the email. So this send email step here, very simple. What we can do is embed the template that we want right in the workflow. So you can see it here. You can use HTML and template variables just like you'd expect. And so that gets specified in this workflow. So every new workflow you create, every new send email step, you can specify how exactly you want that email to work, right? So it gives you huge flexibility there. And then, as I said, this wait step is not going to be part of the demo. So I'll go back. The last option here, just regular mover certification, exact same thing we looked at, just without that wait step, right? So just took that step out right here. Otherwise, it's this big, ugly mess. Not to say that this product isn't beautiful, of course. So I had disabled the workflow. Now we have to re-enable it so that it'll actually trigger. And now that it's enabled, any identity attribute change is going to trigger this workflow to run. So just to prove that there's no funny business going on, we'll go over to certifications and campaigns. So this is our lab tenant. There aren't any certifications active, right? So anything that shows up is going to be as a result of what we do now. And what we're going to do is make some edits in our authoritative source, in our HR feed. So again, for purposes of this demo, we set it up as just a flat file, CSV file. Just a couple of users so we can illustrate the different attributes changing. So if I go over, I think many of you this will be very familiar. If I go over to the connections and pop into my sources, I can see I've just got 7 accounts coming from this source. And what we're going to do is look at 3 of them that I'm going to change attributes for. So we'll start with Daniel Ricardo. So Daniel is once I pull it up, here we go. Daniel works at McLaren, and he works for Zach Brown. And we're going to be changing those 2 attributes. So unfortunately for Daniel, his contract was terminated. So we don't know where he's going to work. We're going to change McLaren to TBD, and we don't know who he's going to work for. I'm just going to put Daniel as his manager. So 2 out of the 3 attributes are being changed. That should create a certification campaign. The next person that we'll take a look at is Oscar. So lucky for Oscar, he's getting a new job. So Oscar is currently at Alpine. He reports to Otmar, and he's a junior driver. And if you look in our new data here, Oscar's going to be working for McLaren. He's going to be a driver, and he's going to be reporting to Zach Brown. So both of these 2, they're both changing at least 2 of the 3 attributes. That'll trigger a mover certification for us. And then the last one we'll look at real quick is Otmar. So Otmar is currently working for Aston Martin. There it is. And he's going to be moving to Alpine. So he's only changing 1 of the 3. We won't get a certification, at least I hope not, because it's not at least 2 out of the manager, department, and title attributes changing. So I'll skip ahead just a bit. So now we can actually import this. import this file. So if we go back and import the CSV file I just showed you with those 3 changes, this is simulating the HR aggregation running. And just that fast it ran. And because it caused identity attribute changes, the workflows have already been kicked off. So nothing else to do at all. That's already happening. If I go back to the workflows section and click on my mover certification, you can see in the executions area here, I've got 3 new ones. One of them in the middle is already completed successfully. 2 of them are still running. So that's a good sign because one of them we were expecting to do nothing, and 2 of them we were hoping to get a certification. But this interface is a great spot to see what executions you've had. You can actually download some reports and kind of get into troubleshooting and debugging if you're having failures like I may have had a little bit earlier in the day. But in any case, so as these run, it takes a couple minutes to process through. But now if we go back to our certifications, so the certification campaigns, as expected, we have 2 campaigns for Daniel and Oscar, and that's just, it's as simple as that, right? So this workflow has taken care of your mover certification. We'll follow, and then, getting ahead of myself. And then the last piece was the email, right? So we have 2 emails going out, the custom email, and you can see one for each Daniel and Oscar, where it notifies, hey, there was a job change detected, right? So you can give the user that specific context, the manager, and it requires access certification, and that you must complete this within 10 business days, right? So whatever additional instructions you need to add, you can do that. And then, of course, you get the regular email on the certification as well, which give you the link and the details on the campaign. So with that, and here's the regular email with the link at the bottom. So if I now go back to Identity Now, so we can go back to the workflows. So what I hope to see is that they've both completed. And again, we can go and look at the executions. And yes, all 3 successfully completed. So we're done. We've processed our movers. So we're going to stop the demo there. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of a preview of how simple it can be, lightly complex. Just hold on one second. And I think I'd like to get into, do you have a specific question on the demo or just a general question?
It relates to that.
Okay.
We have to disable the workflow to edit it.
Yes.
It might take 5, 10, 15 minutes to edit that.
Yes.
Triggers might come in during that duration.
Yep.
How do you deal with that?
Well, so I would do my workflow editing all in a lower environment, right? Get everything configured.
Copy them?
Yeah, you can export them and then import them into your production tenant. Yep. So with that, let me just close out with, what did this mean for the client? So what's the benefit of all this workflow stuff we just talked through? So first of all, got the compliance team to go away. I'm sure that's always a great feeling for all of you, right? They have someone else to bother now. Second of all, I think this is huge. It's a supported solution, right? This is part of the SailPoint offering. So we talked about the option that you have to use event triggers, and that's still a good option in some cases. But this is going to be part of the product, right? It is part of the product. And so you don't have to deal with, I need a Lambda person around, or I need somebody who can support this other set of hardware over here, or that type of thing. And you don't have to worry about SailPoint's not going to be able to support that because it's a homegrown thing, right? Of course, they avoided having to deal with anything manual, right? Because this client was actually not in a position to set up event triggers, set up all that other stuff. For them, it was either we're going to make this work with what comes with Identity Now, or we're going to have to figure out something manual. And like I said, it was thousands of transfers per year. So avoiding that manual process was huge for them. And then the last piece, all of this is contained within one system, right? It's in Identity Now, so you're not having different places where information is residing. Keeps it simple, keeps it clean. So it came at just the right time for this client. The compliance team had come after them right as Workflows is going into beta. We were able to get it together. Hopefully, I think there's many of you that would love to have this functionality. Hopefully, you can get your hands on it here soon if you don't already. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. Yes?
So, with any kind of automation, errors happen. You showed us how you can go look for those error jobs, but how do you get more proactive about that as a team?
Well,
All those extra skills that you just talked about.
so the extra skills are around supporting the, like Lambda and external stuff with the workflows themselves. So those reports have a breakdown of the steps, like where things happen. So if there's an error in there, then
To have a person that just watches a report.
well, you would have somebody who's checking on failures. Yes, when it happens.
Can you repeat the questions for the screen?
Oh, yes. Do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, so are you also asking about what are we doing about this in the future? We have plans to augment how you audit, how you monitor.
That's the essence of this, because if I'm going to automate something, I want to also be able to monitor and get proactive notifications when errors happen and not have it be someone's job to watch a report.
Right. So we do have Thomas Burt is a product manager. Thomas, do you have an ability to respond to that?
And sorry, did we repeat the question for the stream?
Yeah, so the question is, when you're running workflows, someone has to monitor to see if an error has happened, as opposed to some more automated way to notify somebody that there's been an issue or a problem that has occurred. And so the answer to that is yes. Today, that's what you have to do. Someone would have to monitor and look at it. And so, but looking forward, what our plans are, and this goes back to forward-looking statements, maybe some roadmap information shouldn't be dependent upon, et cetera, for our, non-disclosure that we have to do there.
Maybe to the product manager, right? Are those errors written into the CCM logs?
They are not currently written to the CCM logs. They're their own execution log detail. But
Yeah, I mean, if they are getting written to the execution log, one of the options could be
Yep.
have integrations with Splunk or something where you could configure the monitoring and everything.
Yeah.
That's one of the options that you can do now.
And that is actually on the roadmap as well. So to address some of that and being able to trigger when there is a failure in a workflow execution.
Can I get clarity on that? So are you saying that those errors are not being forwarded to the search feature, therefore not being able to be forwarded to Splunk?
Can you speak to that?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. That'd be amazing if it was forwarded to search, because then you can automate monitoring.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So your trigger was just identity attributes change?
Yes.
Hey, hang on one sec. Let me grab a mic and take advantage so we don't have to repeat the questions. Thank you. Be a little bit easier, I think.
So your trigger logic, right, was just identity attributes change, and then all the steps inside of it, you have to check which one's changed. Is there performance concerns because you have such a general trigger, as opposed to saying, hey, only trigger when one of those three? Like you showed the workflow ran
Yeah.
for all three people, right?
Yeah.
Should it really be?
Well, again, I would probably ask.
I mean,
More to SailPoint, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can hang this way.
So the way that this is built, it's built in with back-end functionality, so it should support literally thousands of those, right? So when you're talking about identity attributes changed, it is a best practice to actually put in a trigger filter. So you're triggering when a specific attribute changes. And you can actually even refine that trigger filter down further to not just specific attributes, but also values within those attributes as well. But it is currently supporting tons of those, right? And obviously, if you have a trigger filter, there's a couple different options there. Trigger filter can actually stop it from firing in the first place, but a comparator would actually exit the workflow at that point. So even if you've got thousands of events per second where identity attributes are changing, if you have a comparator to look for, I want to see that department changed and I want to see that it changed to sales, by way of example, it exits in the false step on that. So.
Yeah, question.
I had the same question about the performance, because if you're running it runtime after every aggregation, that means it's looking for attribute changes, right? If I do aggregation 3 times a day, is there a performance issue?
Not,
That is one.
not that we've discovered thus far in our testing and in our production environments as well.
And you might have answered this other question, second question also, can I filter on what it triggers? Because there could be organizational changes where a department is changing completely, right? And we know about that change. Can we exclude that change from triggering any move?
Yes, and that's actually a best practice. You can apply trigger filters. And we're actually, so a couple of highlights on that comment. You guys saw, when you saw the configuration for the individual actions, what you see there is JSON path, right? But you have the capability to open the variable selector. I don't know if you guys saw that on the screen. It'll actually allow you to select, right? So it's a GUI tool that allows you to select with that. Right now, we support trigger filtering and JSON path. We're building additional trigger filters that have that GUI capability as well. So yeah, it is a best practice to put filters in place. The key there too is you want to track the executions, right? So you want to see how many times it's executing. If you put just identity attributes changed without any kind of filter in there, you're going to see thousands.
Right, and that was one of my other concerns. It's like, I don't want to see it random.
Right.
I'm only 10 people in this certification.
Yep.
Well, and I think the, filtering on manager and department and title, that's your limit here, right? Obviously, you wouldn't trigger it on any other attribute changing, but you need to see those three in this case. And to that point, we haven't seen any performance issues in this environment, but
You know, we've been running in production for 2 quarters now with a select group of customers. So
And this is only for the source of truth attribute changes, right? You can't do this, you can't trigger workflows for possible addition of an account to a source or an entitlement change.
So there are 2 ways to trigger. One way is through the ETS system, an event trigger, or an external trigger. So we have to detect something that changed within ETS, or you have to manually start a workflow using, not manually, sorry, you can set up a process that we'll call the external trigger.
My question was more directed towards, can it solve the native change detection problem as well? On, let's say, Active Directory or any other application, if someone's adding an account outside or someone's changing it or giving access outside identity now, can the workflow trigger detect it?
Well, we'll detect it on the aggregation, right?
On an application aggregation, not just the source of truth.
Right, so when the aggregation occurs, we're merging those values at that point, right? So we're going to pick that up. It's an ETS event. We're going to see it, and we'll trigger it at that point.
So I have just a question about the workflows. Obviously, great. There's a lot of power you can do with that. I have a lot of our business users that are asking for features like that, these kind of workflow things, but as it relates to the, like an access request approval, is there any plans to allow some of these workflow things in other areas, like an access request approval workflow?
Yeah, so the question is around whether or not we're eventually going to support access request approval stuff. There is actually an action today that has access request decisions and access request capabilities. As long as we can trigger on it, we can support a workflow around that. And there is actually, for future development, more approval-based workflows. So like singular approval, multi-step approval, quorum approval, that type of thing.
What all modules does workflow support?
Anything that can write into ETS, really. I mean, so we've got a couple of these integration workflows already.
Everything under Business Plus workflows will work.
Yep. And again, it's wide open there, right? So anything that's going to go through ETS will trigger a workflow for the most part. Anything that you want to trigger from external, like a ServiceNow or other SIEM tool, or even, let's say, a risk engine to trigger a workflow, you can use the external trigger.
Back to the question around errors and organizational change. Are there ways to set limits? Let's say HR makes an error, which was alluded to in the presentation, right? And they end up changing their region or a department or something. And it doesn't get picked up like in the time limit. Is there a way to set like threshold limits
So let me summarize the question. You're asking if there's a threshold limit, let's say a source, a normal aggregation picks up 100 changes a day, by way of example. You want some kind of thresholding where,
All of a sudden we see like
right,
1,000.
right, where there's 1,000 on the aggregation process completed. So we do have an aggregation completed trigger, and what you can actually do is see the value within that, use a comparator. So the comparator would just basically compare the numbers, and then you can proceed down a path in that place. If it's greater than, let's say, whatever your average happens to be of 100, you would go down the true path. If it's less than that or equal to that, you would go down the false path.
So we are at time. I want to say thank you to everyone for coming out. We'll hang around if you want to ask any questions, but really appreciate the attendance and hope you learned something.